Welcome to my... Okay, let's get into it. I'm going to start with Mohammed Golkar 2789. What's the best piece of musical advice you've been given? Well, I'm sure like a lot of you, I've been given a lot of advice over my life, but I'm going to go with composing is a marathon, not a sprint. And what I take away from that is that idea of a composer getting struck with inspiration, maybe walking around the woods and writing a symphony, that's nice and romantic, but it's just a nice idea. I don't think moments of inspiration necessarily lend themselves into full, extended and developed pieces. So behind most great pieces, I think, is a lot of editing and hard work. Yes, write something at the moment of inspiration, but then keep working on it. Keep working until it's finished. The next question is from Tony Mina 1121. How do you, in your arrangements, balance simplicity with density, for lack of a better word? Very complicated counterpoint and or harmony are really interesting, but it can sometimes get a bit overwhelming. What are your thoughts about this topic? Again, thanks a lot. This is a great question, and it's not something I've talked about on my channel before, but I feel really strongly about this. So I'm going to answer this in a bit of detail. If you don't want the detail, please go ahead to the next question. But if you want to find out about how to structure pieces and how I think about the language of music and the language of your own pieces, then have a listen to this answer. One small element of this question is about taste. For instance, Jacob Collier, who is an absolutely amazing musician and genius, often has very dense music. In a way, it's quite maximalist, and often for me, it can be too much. And that's the taste aspect. His music is certainly not wrong, and this is the real heart and gem of the advice, by the way. The entire sound environment and structure are sewn very early on in the introduction of your piece. It contains the basic information and sound world of your piece. How does this work? Well, here's my analogy. It's like a tree. For a large tree with big long branches and leaves, you need a stout trunk with deep roots. The tree would look odd if it had massive branches and a thin trunk, wouldn't it? Each tree is unique, even ones from the same species, but they all look right. For instance, a palm tree has an entirely different trunk with only branches at the top. By the way, I'm not a botanist, so leave any tree comments down below. As your piece develops, it's like a tree that's growing. The final shape is inherent in it as it grows. The audience, and usually yourself when you're composing, don't know the shape of the final tree, so it can still be surprising and enriching. But what has unfolded and is left at the end feels completely natural and satisfying. Some pieces by inexperienced composers are trees that feel like they are unbalanced and will fall over. This is because they may have too many branches for the trunk, or that the type of leaf is completely incompatible. I'm getting pretty esoteric here, but hopefully this makes sense. But what I'm basically saying is that the simplicity or the density of the piece needs to be inherent in the original seed or idea so that it sounds natural, whatever that is. Now here's for the really difficult part. When I start a piece, I don't know the shape of the final tree yet. The trick as a composer or arranger is to uncover what the tree actually is. This is an uncertain way of working that can take longer but is very rewarding. And that's why Jacob Collier's arrangement of Stevie Wonder's Don't You Worry About a Thing doesn't sound wrong. Note how exciting the start is. It has a sound effect that crescendos into a vocal groove. Almost anything could happen in that piece, and does. And it's also why you can listen to a Philip Glass piece and not question the lack of texture changes throughout. This is true of arrangements as well. It's just that you have someone else's germ of an idea to start with. Wow, that was a long answer, but it's a massive subject and I could talk about this for several days. If you'd like to see me make a video about developing a melody or something, let me know in the comments. I guess my TLDR answer is, don't be afraid of simplicity. An ash or a thorn tree are still amazing. I'm going to go on to Colehammer's 8670 question next, as it relates to the last one I just answered. And their question is, I struggle with writing cohesive pieces and wonder if it is because I struggle with transitions. What are your suggestions? Well, it's a little hard to answer as I haven't heard any of your work, but generally I find that a lot of composers and arrangers tend to have too many transitions and ideas in their work. I would have a look at some of your favourite pieces and arrangements and see how many real ideas and transitions are actually in them. Then if they do transition in some way, what effect or what did they enhance by doing so? A lot of really effective pieces use fairly minimal ideas and ingredients. They are just used and placed really well. Both Franco Omar Lopez and Seb Squonks asked, how do you find work as an arranger? Yeah, isn't that the good question? Well, as amazing as the internet is and it's bringing us all together here to talk about great nerdy music stuff, which I love, almost 100% of my arranging work has come from local musicians and ensembles. Make sure you get to know all of the local orchestras, ensembles, choirs, community groups in your area and let them know you're around. There are a lot of groups who actually need arranging and are just sort of making do with what they have. It's not glamorous, but it's a great way to start. Once you've got the job, do the best you can, maintain good communication with the musicians and group, and hand your work in on time. Musical Blam asks, how should I start to get into arranging/composing jazz charts? It's been a huge interest of mine, but I'm not sure how I should approach it. Would writing pieces for jazz combo be a good start? Yes, writing for combo would be a great start. Are you in a band or anything? Arrange anything you can get your hands on. It can be fun to arrange a standard just for piano, seeing how much you can change and make it more interesting to you in terms of rhythm, harmony and new melodies. Start with anything at all and change it into something you like better. Jacob Bavetta asks, was wondering what you thought about AI in arranging. Would you use it? Do you think it will make it more accessible or will it just end up meaning arrangers don't develop the right skills themselves? Well, this is a bit of a hard one. And I'm not really an expert on AI, but what I can say is that AI can't currently deal with deep creative decisions and questions like I often talk about on the channel. It's not quite the same, but in my life I've seen the transition from sheet music to notation software like Sibelius, and I've seen those positives and negatives. The positives being accessibility and how easy it is to start, and the negatives being that they're not real instruments and people, and it doesn't give you the skill in working with real musicians and sounds. The next question is from Jaire Petty 6249. Hey Gil, I've been thinking about learning how to write for strings so I can start getting some studio orchestra charts going. Would love some references on this topic. Smile. Hey there, I guess it's a bit confusing, but my name's not Gil. My name is Alex Vandenbroek. I'm a composer-arranger living in New Zealand. Gil Evans is one of my musical heroes and someone I reference a lot on the channel. Strings are great to write for as they have a nice homogeneous sound. There are some great videos and resources about writing for strings already, so here's a tip from something I do. Take a moment or a segment from a piece you really like, and then make a reduction of that bar or section. The reduction allows you to get to the essence of the sound really quickly, while simultaneously you're connecting the sounds with the written music. YouTube has lots of follow-along scores, and of course you can get scores from the internet or your local library. Sometimes I open up a score that I haven't looked at for a while, and I find a piece of manuscript in there where I've already made a reduction. Pollo Destroyer of Worlds 1169 asks, what instruments do you play? I play the piano, trumpet and guitar, all of them poorly. I really consider myself a composer-arranger. My mum started me on the piano when I was really young. Then I started the trumpet when I was a teenager and studied jazz when I was playing that. Isaac L-C asks, what are your top 3 favourite chords of all time? Love all your work, unbelievably insightful. Thank you. Well, as I'm sure you know, context is everything, as it depends on what comes around those chords. But let's just take them as they stand. I'll say D flat 6 for the sharpened ninth. This D something chord, which I wrote for orchestra. And a G minor add 9, with the ninth right here. CalCradden6293 asks, who's your favourite arranger working in the scene right now? If you could have lessons with any arranger alive or dead, who would it be? As I live in New Zealand, I'm really far away from the centre of the jazz world, so I feel like I'm really out of touch with the jazz scene. And there are so many amazing jazz arrangers and composers living in the world right now, and some of them I get to work with here in New Zealand. Well, this channel is called Gil Evans Inside Out, so I guess I would have to choose Gil Evans for someone who has passed away. And for a living arranger, I'll say a few names: Ed Partika, Toshiko Akiyoshi, Darcy James Argue, Maria Schneider, and many more. Back to another question from Tony Mena 1121. When arranging trombone quartets, or anything for that matter, what do you do when the melody gets too low? I find harmonizing in the low range of instruments gets muddy most of the times. Do you know some way to get around that? Thank you. Well, this question was cool as another subscriber chipped in with some answers and ideas, and they were helpful as well. Here's some more ideas. You could have a unison passage, or momentarily reduce the harmony parts, like Sammy Nestico does in this example. And if possible, make sure you've started in a good key. There's nothing wrong with changing the key to suit. And the only other thing I'd add is that sometimes lowering the lowest note can open up the chord a bit. So if I play the bass note in this range, it can sound a little muddy, but if I move it down the octave, it can sound just a little more open. Give those a try. Frank Truffaut 4312 asks, how is it possible that Gil had no university music education, or did he? No, Gil didn't go to a university, but he was a very well-read person and visited the New York Public Library to get out music scores and other things. There are 2 biographies about Gil. I can recommend them both. They give a great insight into Gil as a person and a musician. Bronston Summers 4254 asks, have you heard of Michel Legrand? If you have, what do you think of his jazz arrangements? Yes, I have heard of him. He's an amazing composer. I think his jazz arrangements are interesting. I like how he comes at them from his own background, and they sound completely distinctive. Gabriel Casaro asked, what are some of your favourite arrangements for small ensemble? Oh, that's a good question. There are so many good ones, so I'll tell you a couple of Gil's I like. I love Gil's arrangements of Round Midnight on Miles's album Round Midnight. It's simple and effective. And another is the really tasty Mademoiselle Maybury from Fields to Kilimanjaro. Gil isn't credited in the liner notes in these albums, but it's widely acknowledged that he had a large part to play in these pieces. Ronaldo Arayo asks about the orchestration of the Maids of Cadiz in bars 20 to 25. Well, check it out, here's the short score. The trumpets are muted and have a nice tight voicing, and it's an interesting chord as well. Nino Ciampa asks, have you explored much salsa music? Apart from the rhythmic complexity, the harmony and arrangements can be super dense. Orchestrationally, sometimes I see some similarity with some of Gil's writing. Groups often have a horn section somewhere between the size of a combo and a big band, with combinations that may include flute, trumpets, trombones, baritone sax, and other saxophones. Now, I haven't checked out a lot of salsa music, but every time I hear some I love it. I like a wide variety of music. Thanks for the recommendations you sent me. Manuel Rodriguez asks, your thoughts on the euphonium or transcription of the ending of Yesternow that people say is by Gil Evans, but it's more likely to be by Hermeto Pascal. Thanks, man. Yeah, that ending on that Miles Davis track Yesternow is really awesome, and there's a good chance it's by Gil Evans. He did a lot of work with Miles Davis, obviously, and a lot of it went uncredited. But sadly, I couldn't find any confirmation of this in my books, so I can't be sure. So thanks for bringing that one up. If you'd like to talk about your music in detail with me, I give online lessons. There's a link in the description. Peace!